The cuffs snapped shut, cold steel biting into my wrists, and I hit the pavement hard, my cheek scraping against the rough asphalt as a voice barked, "Don't move, or you'll regret it." My heart pounded, not from fear but from the surreal weight of it all. Me, Lieutenant General Amara Brooks, a black woman who'd led troops through war zones, now pinned down in Memphis, Tennessee, like a common criminal, all because of the color of my skin. Just minutes earlier, I'd stepped out of a corner store, a bottle of iced tea in hand, my navy blazer stained with a trickle of blood from a cut above my eye, a clumsy collision with a shelf while reaching for a snack. I'd been on my way to a veterans conference, my mind replaying the speech I'd prepared about unity, when Officer Nathan Holt, a wiry man with a sneer sharper than his badge, spotted me. His eyes locked on the blood, then my face, and I saw the decision form before he even spoke. "Black woman, blood, trouble. What did you do, start a brawl?" he snapped, striding toward me, his rookie partner, Officer Miguel Torres, trailing behind, his face tight with unease. I stood still, 5 feet 9 inches of composure honed over decades in the army, my voice steady as I said, "Just a cut, officer. I'm heading to a meeting." Holt laughed, a harsh sound that drew a small crowd, phones already out, capturing the moment. A teenage girl, Lena, maybe 16, hovered near the store's door, her apron crooked from her shift, her eyes wide as she recognized me from a community talk I'd given last month. I'd told her then, "Your dreams don't need permission," and now she watched, frozen, as Holt demanded my ID. I reached for my wallet, slow and deliberate, but he grabbed my arm, twisting it back. "Don't try anything funny," he hissed, and I felt the cuffs lock on, the metal pinching my skin. Torres hesitated, his hand hovering near his radio, but he stayed silent, his eyes darting between Holt and me. The crowd murmured, a man shouting, "She didn't do nothing," but Holt ignored them, shoving me toward the cruiser, my tea bottle rolling into the gutter. I caught Lena's gaze, her phone trembling as she recorded, her face a mix of anger and fear, and I gave her a small nod, a silent promise that this wasn't the end. Holt's voice dripped with contempt as he muttered, "People like you always think you're above the law." I didn't respond, not because I was cowed, but because I'd learned in dusty briefing rooms and battlefields that silence can be louder than words. My phone, tucked in my blazer, buzzed faintly, a signal from the device I carried for my role in a Pentagon task force, one that audited law enforcement for bias. I'd trained officers to see past stereotypes, to pause before acting, and now I was the one judged by a glance. Holt tossed my phone onto the dash, scoffing at its sleek design, a silver eagle etched on the back. "What's this, some fancy toy?" he said, pressing the loan button, unaware it was sending a pulse to Arlington, Virginia, 700 miles away. Torres climbed into the passenger seat, his jaw tight, and I saw the conflict in his eyes, a young man caught between duty and doubt. The cruiser pulled away, the store fading, but Lena's face stayed with me, her courage a spark in a moment of darkness. I leaned back, my wrists throbbing, and thought of my grandmother, who'd marched in Memphis decades ago, her voice steady as she told me, "Hold your head high, Amara, no matter who tries to push it down." Her words anchored me now, a reminder that this wasn't just about me, it was about Lena, Torres, the crowd, and every person who'd felt the sting of being seen as less. Holt's taunts continued, calling me trouble and arrogant, but I kept my gaze steady, meeting his in the rearview mirror, calm but unyielding. He shifted, his smirk faltering for a split second, and I knew he sensed something he couldn't name. The station wasn't far, and as we pulled up, I saw a custodian, Mr. James, a black man in his 60s, polishing the steps. His eyes met mine, and a flicker of recognition passed. He'd been at my talk, too, nodding when I'd spoken about justice. He paused, his rag still, and mouthed, "You're not alone." His quiet defiance was a lifeline, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were those who saw the truth. Holt yanked me out, his grip rough, and I stumbled, the blood on my cheek cracking as it dried. Torres followed, his steps heavy, his face a mask of guilt. Inside, the station was a blur of fluorescent lights and stale air, and Holt pushed me into a holding room, barking, sit and keep quiet. I sat, my back straight, my hands still cuffed, and watched as he tossed my phone onto a desk, its screen glowing faintly. The signal was out there now, racing to a room where decisions moved faster than prejudice. I thought of my team, the soldiers I'd led, the officers I'd trained, all trusting me to see them as people, not threats. I thought of Lena, her phone capturing a truth that would spread. I thought of Mr. James, risking a glance to offer hope. And I thought of Torres, his silence a choice he'd have to face. Holt leaned against the wall, his eyes cold, saying I'd learn my lesson soon enough. I didn't speak, but my gaze held his, and I saw the unease creep in, a crack in his armor. He was the villain here, not because he wore a badge, but because he'd built a career on seeing people like me as problems to be solved, not humans to be heard. His smirk hid a deeper fear, one I'd seen in others who clung to power to mask their doubts. I knew his story, years of unchecked authority, complaints buried, a man who thrived on control but crumbled when challenged. The room was chilly, the cuffs too tight, but I felt a fire inside, a certainty that this moment, painful as it was a chance to show what I'd always believed, that justice begins when someone refuses to break, even when the world expects them to. The story was just starting, and as the signal from my phone reached its destination, I knew the truth would find its way, not through my shouts, but through the actions of those who'd see this through. The holding room's fluorescent lights buzzed like a swarm of angry bees, casting a harsh glow on the scuffed linoleum floor where I sat, my wrists still bound by cuffs that dug deeper with every shift of my body. The ache in my cheek, where the pavement had bitten me earlier, pulsed in time with my heartbeat, but I kept my back straight, my gaze steady, refusing to let the weight of this moment bend me. I was Amara Brooks, Lieutenant General in the U.S. Army, a woman who'd faced down chaos in war zones, yet here I was, in a Memphis police station, reduced to a suspect because Officer Nathan Holt saw my black skin and a smear of blood and wrote a story that had no truth in it. Holt leaned against the desk, his wiry frame taut with a restless energy, his eyes glinting with a mix of triumph and unease as he tossed my phone back and forth, its silver eagle emblem catching the light. "Fancy toy for someone like you," he sneered, his voice a blade meant to cut, but I didn't flinch. I'd learned long ago, in rooms filled with men who doubted my rank, that silence could be a shield, a way to let others reveal themselves. My mind drifted to my late mentor, Colonel Harris, whose mantra, "Strength is in the pause," had carried me through moments like this. I recited it silently, each word a tether to my resolve, knowing the signal my phone had sent was already racing 700 miles to the Pentagon, where my team would answer. Holt's taunts grew sharper, his words laced with a bitterness I recognized, not just prejudice, but a fear of losing the control he'd built his career on. "No ID, no story, just blood and attitude," he said, pacing now, his boots scuffing the floor. "You think you're special, don't you?" I met his gaze, calm and unyielding, and saw the flicker of doubt he tried to hide, a crack in the armor of a man who'd buried complaints to keep his badge. Officer Miguel Torres, the rookie, stood near the door, his hands clenched, his face a map of conflict. He was young, maybe 25, with an earnestness that hadn't yet been hardened by the job, and I saw the weight of his silence pressing on him. "Sir, shouldn't we check her story?" he ventured, his voice low, but Holt cut him off with a glare. "Follow protocol, Torres, or you'll be out of a job." Miguel's jaw tightened, and I felt a pang of empathy. He was trapped, not by cuffs, but by a system that rewarded loyalty over truth. I thought of the officers I'd trained in my Pentagon task force, men and women I'd taught to question their instincts, to see people, not profiles. Had Miguel been one of them, he might have spoken up, but now he stood silent, his choice a wound he'd carry long after this day. The door creaked, and Mr. James, the custodian, shuffled in, his mop trailing a faint streak of water. His eyes, framed by deep lines, met mine, and I saw the same recognition from outside, a quiet strength that reminded me of my grandmother's marchers. He moved slowly, wiping a desk near me, and whispered, "They don't know who you are, General, but I do." His words, soft as a prayer, were a lifeline, and I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. Holt didn't notice, too busy mocking my phone, pressing its button again, oblivious to the signal it had already sent. "What's this supposed to do, call your lawyer?" He laughed, but his voice wavered, as if he sensed the ground shifting beneath him. I thought of Lena, the teenage cashier who'd recorded my arrest, her phone capturing a truth that was already spreading on X, sparking a fire Holt couldn't douse. Her courage, like Mr. James's, was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were those who'd stand, however small their act. My mind flashed to a memory from my early days as a captain, when I'd faced a board of officers who'd questioned my promotion, their eyes saying what their words didn't: a black woman didn't belong. I'd stood tall then, as I did now, knowing that proving them wrong wasn't about shouting, but about enduring. Holt's pacing stopped, and he leaned close, his breath hot with frustration. "You're wasting my time," he said, his voice low, almost pleading, as if he needed me to break to justify his actions. I didn't, and that unnerved him more than any words could. His past, I'd later learn, was a trail of complaints. Stops without cause, rough handling, all buried by a station that valued order over justice. He was a man who thrived on fear, but I gave him none, and that was his undoing. Miguel shifted, his hand brushing his radio, and I saw the question in his eyes: was this right? I wanted to tell him to speak, to trust his gut, but I knew he'd have to find that courage himself. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the weight of choices: Holt's to accuse, Miguel's to stay silent, Mr. James's to risk a whisper, mine to wait. I thought of my task force, the late nights crafting training modules to teach officers like Holt to pause, to question, to see. Had I failed them, or had the system failed us all? The cuffs chafed my wrists, a 1.5-inch reminder of my vulnerability, but I felt a fire inside, a certainty that this moment was a test, not just for me, but for everyone here. Holt slammed my phone onto the desk, its screen glowing faintly, and I knew the signal was out there, a beacon to those who'd answer. I thought of my grandmother again, her voice steady as she'd told me, "Amara, they'll try to dim your light, but you keep shining." Her words were my armor now, a shield against Holt's scorn. Mr. James lingered, his mop moving slower, and I caught his eye, a silent thank you passing between us. He was no bystander. He was a witness, like Lena, like the crowd outside, all part of a story bigger than this room. Holt's voice broke my thoughts, demanding I start talking, but I stayed silent, my gaze holding his, and I saw the fear he couldn't hide, a man who knew, deep down, that his power was fragile. Miguel opened his mouth, then closed it, his silence louder than Holt's shouts, and I felt a pang for him, knowing he'd carry this moment like a scar. The clock on the wall ticked, each second a step closer to the truth, and I leaned back, my wrists aching but my spirit unbroken. This wasn't just about me, it was about every person who'd been judged by a glance, every voice silenced by fear, every heart that dared to hope for justice. The signal was out there, and soon, the world would see what Holt had tried to hide, not through my words, but through the actions of those who'd rise. The air in the holding room grew heavier, the buzz of the fluorescent lights now a distant hum as I sat, my wrists raw from the cuffs, my mind anchored by the certainty that the signal from my phone had reached its mark. I was Amara Brooks, a black woman, a lieutenant general, and though Officer Nathan Holt saw only a threat in my blood-streaked face, I knew the truth was already stirring, 700 miles away in a Pentagon room where screens glowed red with urgency. Holt's voice sliced through my thoughts, his taunts sharper now, as if my silence was a challenge he couldn't bear. "You think someone's coming for you?" he scoffed, leaning close, his breath sour with coffee and spite. "Nobody cares about people like you." His words stung, not because they were true, but because they echoed the doubts I'd fought my whole career, doubts whispered in boardrooms, etched in the eyes of those who saw my rank but not my worth. I held his gaze, calm and unyielding, and saw the fear he hid, a man whose power rested on others' silence, now unraveling because I refused to break. Miguel Torres, the rookie, paced near the door, his boots scuffing the floor, his face a storm of guilt and indecision. He'd tried to speak earlier, but Holt's glare had silenced him, and now I saw the weight of that choice pressing on his shoulders, a young man torn between the badge he wore and the heart he still had. I wanted to tell him it wasn't too late, that courage could be found in a single step, but I knew he'd have to discover that himself. My thoughts drifted to Lena, the teenage cashier whose phone had captured my arrest, her video now spreading on X, a spark that could ignite a city. Her courage reminded me of my own at her age, standing up to a teacher who'd dismissed my dreams, saying, "Girls like you don't lead." I'd proven her wrong, and now Lena was proving the world wrong, one shaky frame at a time. Back in Arlington, Virginia, I pictured the Pentagon's response room, where my signal had triggered an alert, the screen flashing "Unauthorized Detention, Priority 1." I knew Lisa Chen, a young analyst I'd mentored, would be there, her sharp mind already piecing together the details. She'd once told me, after a late-night training session, that my belief in her had changed her life, and now I trusted her to move fast. The alert would have reached Commander Ellis, a grizzled veteran who'd served with me in Iraq, his voice calm but firm as he ordered a team to deploy. I imagined them now, 4 agents in a black SUV speeding at 75 miles per hour toward Memphis, their titanium clearance cards, 2 by 3 inches, etched with a code no local badge could challenge. Ready to upend Holt's world. They'd used a community app, Memphis Watch, to notify locals, and I pictured the crowd growing outside the station, drawn by Lena's video and a shared hunger for justice. Holt slammed my phone onto the desk, its screen still glowing, and muttered, "This thing's useless." He didn't know it had already done its work, a beacon that would expose his prejudice to a system he couldn't control. His hands shook slightly, a tell I'd seen in soldiers facing their first real test, and I realized Holt wasn't just cruel, he was scared, a man who'd built a career on intimidation, now sensing the ground shift. His record, I'd later learn, was a patchwork of complaints, unjust stops, excessive force, all buried by a station that valued loyalty over truth. He thrived on fear, but my calm was his kryptonite, and it drove him to pace, his voice rising. "You're nobody," he spat, but his eyes betrayed him, searching mine for a crack he couldn't find. Miguel stopped pacing, his hand brushing his radio, and I saw a flicker of resolve, a question forming: could he act, or would he stay silent? I thought of my task force, the late nights teaching officers to pause, to see, to listen. Had I failed Holt, or had he chosen this path long ago? The door opened, and Mr. James entered again, his mop a quiet rhythm against the floor. He glanced at me, his eyes warm with a strength that reminded me of my grandmother's marchers, and I felt a surge of gratitude. He'd risked his job to whisper support earlier, and now he lingered, wiping a desk near Holt, his presence a silent rebuke. Holt didn't notice, too consumed by his own unraveling, but Miguel did, his gaze shifting between us, as if seeing the truth for the first time. I thought of my grandmother's words, "Amara, they'll try to dim your light, but you keep shining," and they steadied me now, a reminder that this moment was bigger than me. It was for Lena, for Miguel, for Mr. James, for every person who'd felt the sting of being judged by skin alone. The clock ticked, each second a step closer to the SUV's arrival, and I felt a fire inside, not of anger, but of purpose. Holt's taunts grew desperate, his voice cracking as he demanded I confess, but I stayed silent, my mantra: strength is in the pause, a shield against his storm. Suddenly, the station's radio crackled, a private frequency buzzing with static, and Holt froze, his hand hovering over it. "Unit 17, report," a voice said, but no one answered, and I knew the team was close, their signal overriding local channels. Holt's face paled, and he muttered, "Dang tech," but his eyes darted to my phone, as if sensing its power. Miguel stepped forward, his voice low. "Sir, maybe we should," Holt cut him off, snapping, "Stay out of it, Torres," but the rookie's resolve held, a spark I hoped would grow. The crowd outside was audible now, a low hum of voices chanting, "Let her go," and I pictured Lena among them, her phone still raised, her courage a beacon. "Mr. James paused, his mop still, and gave me a nod, a silent promise that he'd witness this through. Holt grabbed my phone again, pressing the button frantically, but the screen stayed gray, its work done. I thought of Lisa Chen, her voice steady as she briefed the team, of Commander Ellis, his orders clear, of the crowd, their phones capturing a truth Holt couldn't erase. The door burst open, and 4 agents strode in, their presence a thunderclap in the stale room. The leader, a woman with a steely gaze, held up a titanium card, her voice cutting through Holt's protests. "Release her now," she said, and I saw Holt's world crumble, his hands shaking as he realized he'd misjudged me. Miguel's eyes widened, relief and shame warring in his face, and Mr. James smiled, a quiet triumph in his nod. I stood, my wrists still cuffed, my heart steady, knowing this wasn't the end, but a beginning. A chance to show that justice wasn't a gift, but a right, earned by those who refused to dim their light. The cuffs were gone, but the sting lingered on my wrists, a faint red mark tracing where I'd been bound, as I stood in the Memphis police station's lobby, the air thick with the weight of what had just unfolded. I was Amara Brooks, a black woman, a lieutenant general, and though Officer Nathan Holt had seen only a threat in my skin, the truth had roared in with 4 Pentagon agents, their titanium cards silencing his scorn. Now, as Holt stood frozen, his badge gleaming but his authority crumbling, I felt no triumph, only a quiet resolve to turn this moment into something more than my release. I reached into my blazer, my fingers brushing the silver ID tag, 1 by 2 inches, etched with a shield no civilian could replicate, and held it up, its glint catching the light like a mirror reflecting Holt's misjudgment. "You saw a threat, not a person," I said, my voice steady, not accusing but heavy with truth, and I saw his eyes flicker, a mix of shame and defiance. He'd built a career on control, burying complaints to shield his prejudice, but now, with the crowd outside chanting and Lena's video burning through X, his armor was cracking. Miguel Torres, the rookie, stepped closer, his face pale, his hands no longer clenched but open, as if shedding the silence that had bound him. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he whispered, and I saw the guilt in his eyes, a young man who'd chosen wrong but wasn't lost. I nodded, my heart softening, and said, "Speak when it's hard, Miguel. That's how you make it right." He swallowed, his resolve hardening, and I knew this moment would shape him, a lesson I'd taught in my Pentagon task force but now lived before him. Mr. James, the custodian, stood by the door, his mop forgotten, his smile a quiet victory, as if he'd always known the truth would break through. I thought of Lena, her courage fueling the crowd outside, and of Lisa Chen, my analyst, whose quick action had sent the team to free me. This wasn't just my story, it was theirs, a tapestry of voices refusing to stay silent. Holt's shoulders sagged, but he muttered, "I followed protocol, a weak defense that fooled no one." I stepped forward, my voice low but firm. Protocol doesn't justify seeing a person as a problem. I pulled out a folder from my bag, its pages heavy with evidence of Holt's past, a 2020 incident where he'd roughed up a veteran, Marcus Lee, for looking suspicious at a bus stop, a case buried by the station's silence. I laid it on the desk, the photos of Marcus's bruised face a silent accusation, and Holt looked away, his hands trembling. "This ends now," I said, not for him but for the room, for Miguel, for Mr. James, for the crowd outside. The station chief, Captain Reynolds, entered, his face grim, and announced Holt's immediate suspension, his voice heavy with the weight of a system forced to face itself. I felt no joy, only a determination to ensure this wasn't just a moment, but a movement. Hours later, at a community center 5 miles away, I stood before 200 Memphians, their faces a mix of anger, hope, and curiosity. Lena was there, her apron gone, her eyes bright with pride, and I invited her to the front, saying, "This young woman showed us what courage looks like." The crowd cheered, and Lena blushed, her voice steady as she said, "I just did what was right." I smiled, my heart swelling, and announced a youth workshop I'd start, teaching kids like Lena to de-escalate conflicts, to turn fear into understanding. The idea had come to me in the holding room, a way to plant seeds where Holt had sown division. I thought of my grandmother, who'd marched in Memphis, her voice echoing in my mind, "Amara, change starts with the young." The room buzzed with energy, and I saw Miguel in the back, his badge still on but his posture different, as if he'd shed a weight. He'd volunteered to help with the workshop, a step toward redemption, and I nodded at him, a silent acknowledgement of his choice. Mr. James sat near the front, his hands folded, his presence a reminder that even the quietest voices could shift a tide. A local podcast, Memphis Rising, had gone viral, featuring veterans who'd served with me, their tributes painting a picture of a leader who'd never needed a spotlight. One said, "General Brooks taught us to see people, not threats," and I felt a pang, wondering if I'd done enough. The crowd asked questions, their voices raw. How could this happen? What could they do? I shared Marcus Lee's story, not to shame but to show the cost of silence, and urged them to demand transparency, to vote, to speak. A woman, maybe 40, stood and said, "I've been stopped for nothing, too. You give me hope." Her words hit me hard, a reminder that this wasn't about me, but about every person who'd felt invisible. Holt's face flashed in my mind, his defiance fading as the chief had stripped his badge, and I wondered what drove him. Not just prejudice, but a fear of being seen as weak, a fear that had twisted him into a villain. He wasn't a monster, but a man who'd chosen wrong, again and again, until it defined him. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the room, on Lena's bright eyes, on Miguel's quiet resolve, on the crowd's growing unity. The workshop would start next week, I said, and invited them to join, to learn, to build. A teen raised his hand, asking, "What if they don't listen?" I paused, my voice soft but firm. "Keep speaking. Truth doesn't need permission." The crowd nodded, and I felt a fire inside, not of anger, but of purpose. As the meeting ended, people lingered, sharing stories, signing up for the workshop, their voices a chorus of change. I stepped outside, the night air cool, and saw Lena talking to Miguel, their words earnest, a bridge forming where Holt had built walls. Mr. James approached, his eyes warm, and said, "You did good, General." I smiled, my heart full, and thought of my task force, of Lisa Chen, of the veterans on the podcast, all part of this moment. The station was behind me, but its lessons weren't. Holt's fall, Miguel's rise, Lena's courage, all proof that justice wasn't a gift, but a fight. I looked at the stars, my grandmother's voice echoing, and knew this was just the beginning, a mirror held up to a city, a system, a nation, daring them to see themselves and choose better. A month had passed since the cuffs scarred my wrists, but as I stood before the Memphis corner store where it all began, the echo of that day fueled not pain, but purpose. I was Amara Brooks, a black woman, a lieutenant general, and though I'd walked free from that station, I returned now to nurture the seeds of change planted in its shadow. The store's glass door reflected a mural above. Vibrant words declaring, "See the person, not the color," crafted by teens inspired by Lena's video, now a beacon of hope. I stepped out, my blazer smooth, the cut above my eye healed, and saw Lena, no longer a cashier but a community organizer, her clipboard a scepter as she rallied kids for my youth workshop. Her eyes sparkled when she saw me, and I smiled, my heart lifting at her transformation. "General Brooks, you're here," she said, her voice confident, and I replied, "Lena, your courage outshines any rank I hold." She stood taller, a leader born from a single act, and I thought of Nathan Holt, his badge gone, his name a warning in Memphis, a man undone not by my title but by the truth he couldn't silence. His fall wasn't enough, change demanded more, and I saw it in the billboard across the street. 10 by 20 feet, part of the "See the Person" campaign I'd sparked, its message rippling from Seattle to Miami. Inside the store, a new cashier greeted me, and I bought an iced tea, its cold glass a reminder of the day I'd been judged for my skin. My mind turned to Miguel Torres, now leading sessions at my workshop, his rookie silence replaced by a mission to teach officers to see, not assume. "I won't stay quiet again," he'd told me, and I saw my younger self in him, the captain who'd fought to be heard. Mr. James, the custodian, was there too, sharing tales of Memphis's 1960s marches with the kids, his voice a bridge across time. His nod at the station had saved me, and now his stories shaped futures. I stepped outside, the air crisp, and watched teens paint another mural, their laughter a song of possibility. Lena introduced me to Aisha, a 10-year-old whose ex-viral letter had touched millions. "You showed my dad I'm not a threat." I knelt, my heart full, and said, "Aisha, you're why I fight." Her grin was a promise, and I heard my grandmother's voice, "Amara, change starts with the young." The workshop had spread, its de-escalation lessons now in DC schools, where kids practiced resolving disputes with empathy, not fear. I'd visited one class, seeing a girl say, "I'm a person, not a problem," her voice a mirror of my own. The teacher, a black woman, had said, "This is your gift," and I'd wondered if I'd earned it. My Pentagon task force had pushed the Equal Action Act, nearing passage, mandating bias training for police, a law born from my arrest but carried by voices like Lena's, Miguel's, Aisha's. Lisa Chen, my analyst, had testified, her words fierce, "Equality isn't a rank, it's a right." Her faith, like Miguel's growth, like Mr. James's wisdom, was part of this wave, a movement I hadn't planned but now held dear. A veteran approached, his eyes wet, saying, "You taught me to see my neighbors differently," and I nodded, my throat tight, knowing this was for every person who'd felt erased. Holt's face flashed in my mind, his brief letter of regret unread, a man whose fear of weakness had made him a villain, but whose fall showed change was possible. The workshop hummed at the community center, with teens, parents, and officers learning together. Miguel taught a session, saying, "Pause before you judge, it saves hearts," and I smiled, joining Lena as she coached kids to record safely, her courage now a lesson. Mr. James shared a March story, Aisha scribbling notes, her future bright. The crowd outside grew, not protesting but planning, their voices a chorus of unity. A principal said, "Your story's in our curriculum," and I shook my head, saying, "It's ours." My arrest, the cuffs, the pavement, Holt's sneer, felt distant, a spark that had lit a fire. The Equal Action Act, Lisa Chen's words, Aisha's letter, all proof that change was a journey, not a moment. As dusk fell, I drove to a school, dropping off workshop guides, and saw a poster with Aisha's words, "No one's a threat if you see their heart." I paused, reflecting on my journey. From a young captain facing doubt, to a general judged by skin, to a woman who turned pain into purpose. I'd learned that silence can be strength, but speaking, like Lena's video, Miguel's training, Aisha's letter, was power. I'd learned that prejudice, like Holt's, wasn't just hate, but fear, fear of change, of truth, of equality. And I'd learned that justice isn't won alone, but with voices like Mr. James's, Lisa's, the crowds, each a ripple in a tide. If you were in a similar situation, with elements like power, status, racism, and social prejudice, how would you approach it to achieve the best possible outcome? I drove on, the mural fading in my rearview, but its truth burned in me, a legacy not of medals, but of a city, a nation, daring to see each other as people, not colors.